Good morning. I hope everyone out there is well. I am Lauren Rosen. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and this is Purely OCD. I am waiting on Kelley Franke, and I'm also waiting on our very special guest today, Catherine Benfield. I'm hoping that I pronounced her name right. So, let me see. Just got Kelley on, I think.
Hi.
Hello. And I think I was wrong because I think I told Catherine that that I could request her, and I don't think I can do that. So Catherine, if you are there, there's a little camera with a plus sign in the lower right-hand corner. You just click on that. You can request to be in the video.
She's not. Maybe I exit and message her.
Okay.
I'll be back.
Okay, sounds good. I'll be here. So that's so sweet. Thank you from the anxious introvert. We try. Neil Hemmer's in the house. By the way, for any of you who are joining as we're sort of getting everybody on board, tonight we have another episode of OCD Game Changers Compassionate Connections. And that's where we talk about OCD and substance use disorder and recovery from both. So if you are interested, join us tonight. We'll be on the OCD Game Changers Facebook page and YouTube. Now, I just saw Catherine join. Catherine, I was incorrect. I'm going to need you to press the little plus sign with the camera in the right hand corner. And if you press that, then you will ask to join. Let's see. Technical fun stuff, guys. All right. Okay, we got you, and I did just accept Catherine's.
Oh, here she is.
Yay!
The queen has arrived.
She has arrived.
Sorry about that. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Really good. Really good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for shoving it a little bit earlier.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. For you, anything.
Anything. Whatever you like. By the way, so just to sort of start us off for this Monday, this is Purely OCD, and today we have a very special guest. Is it Benfield? Catherine Benfield?
Yes.
Yeah. I've never actually spoken to you in real time before, which seems very odd given that I've seen you and I know of all of your great things, but maybe you could sort of fill our listeners in on who you are and all of the exciting projects that you're a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really lovely to talk to you both as well. We've spoken so many times over Messenger and things like that, haven't we?
Yes. I know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. For years now, actually.
Yeah. Years. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Catherine Benfield. I'm a primary school teacher, football coach, loads of different little bits, but my main love is mental health advocacy, particularly OCD advocacy. I run my website, tameandolivia.com, which is all about kind of inserting creativity and compassion into OCD recovery. And I'm working really hard behind the scenes at the moment to do a children's version because I'm sure after the pandemic, it's everywhere now, isn't it? Lots of children are really struggling to get help. So we're working really hard on creating free resources that we're going to be able to get out in the community so that children can work on, you know, kind of just things like resilience and failing forward and stuff like that, just to help them with their mental health. It's so many different little bits. It's hard to list them. I'm working with the University of Bath at the moment and the University of Oxford on two separate sessions. One, we're developing an app for relapse prevention, and the other, we're looking at perinatal OCD. I'm executive producer of a film called Waving, which is going to be, like, I think probably one of the first big mainstream media films about intrusive thoughts and harm-based intrusive thoughts. And I'm sure there's more, and I've probably forgotten some of it. But I just anything to do with OCD, anything trying to get the word out, and I'm there at the moment.
Yes.
Well, and you forgot just general badass, you know?
Yeah,
That's
just
also
badassery.
accurate. Yeah, badassery.
I love that, badass. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
It's a big resume. So yeah, I mean, you're like a trailblazer. So thank you for all the work you've done. I know I've been a huge fan. Lauren knows how excited I am for you to be here.
And same.
Right. And I think, I just feel more connected, more so than any advocate to you because of the maternal OCD. And your story reminds me so much of my own. So thank you for spreading the word. And I know you've done so much work for that, the maternal education stuff and writing articles that in the US we don't have. So thank you for all of that.
And speaking of, since you both might not toot your own horns, you've both Catherine wrote and then Kelley collaborated on an article about perinatal postpartum OCD and urges.
Urges in general, right?
For sure, urges in OCD in general, but specifically using instances of how they can come up in that context, with that subtype. So I imagine that will be a fair amount of what we talk about today, because I think it is, as you write in the article, very important and perhaps underspoken about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just want to say as well, I mean, I've been really lucky to have been able to do the work that I've done so far, and ladies like you two and the other advocates that I work with, we're all doing a job that is incredible and can be exhausting and really tough at times. So many people. I'm quite lucky because I often get recognised and acknowledgement given and validity for the work that I put in. But I know there's loads of people out there who work so hard, but they're doing it quietly and without a public persona, to it. And I think it's really important to acknowledge those people as well, because the amount of advocacy they're doing at the moment is incredible, and they're doing it all anonymously. I get a slap on the back, which I love, but a lot of people
we all love it.
Yeah, it's such a good point, though. There are so many people who are unsung heroes of this work. Yeah, right.
Even just like the funding aspect of it, a lot of them are donating anonymously, and you're like, okay, thank you, world, for that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I noticed is that you talk a fair amount, and I don't know your comfort level about your husband, and that he's present on the website. And I imagine, just even the people who support those of us with OCD are often unsung heroes in this work as well. So shout out.
Definitely. We were having a group this morning. I was working with University of Bath. We were working on a little app thing. And one of the main conversations we were talking about was how isolating OCD can be. And for the first time, we actually, not only, of course, it was isolating for us, but we talked about how isolating it is for partners and significant others and family members, because very often we kind of shove them to the side while we're dealing with what we're dealing with, or we're asking assurance, but without actually... that they can feel very isolated. And that's the first time I'd ever actually thought of that. But Pete is wonderful. And seriously, I have everything is my comfort level. I've spoken about everything for so long. I can just talk about
Same.
Yes, agreed.
You know what? Honestly, go ahead. Sorry.
No. Oh, wait.
Pete's brilliant. He's absolutely amazing. I mean, he's not comfortable kind of doing this kind of stuff, which is fair enough, because 6 years ago I wasn't either. But he has been absolutely incredible. And we kind of talk to each other and then publish it as a way of kind of, I suppose, just being a bit of an example that it can be really tricky to be in a relationship when you have OCD and it's not all plain sailing. So, yeah, that's why we've been doing that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would love to, just as a side note, chat with you more about that sometime, because it's a passion of mine and it's something I'm really excited to give the keynote this year at it's the conference at Kennesaw State that has Riley's Wish as a part of it. So on OCD and substance use disorder. And it's all about connections and the overlap. And we talk about this all the time on this podcast. We tend to put things in boxes like, well, here's the supporter and here's the person who has it. And here's this type of OCD and here's a substance use disorder and here's eating disorders. And it's like, they're so interrelated. And not only is it, all of the disorders that come together, but it's a family issue, right? Mental health is an issue. Mental health is an issue for every single person on this planet, regardless of where they stand with it. But anyway, I digress.
No, I do say, I spent a long time feeling really bad for my son, when I was going through particularly recovery times. But actually now I can see that, there's no way he would have been as open-minded and expressive and as open to talk about mental health and things like that had he not watched me go through some of it. And then we then talked about what's going on, So as hard as there are disadvantages for the family, there's also some positives that come from watching that challenge, watching what you've been through.
Well, opportunities if we play our hand right, where you're able to have dialogue and discussion with him. So wonderful.
Yeah.
Catherine, I'm curious with the article. When you sent me that originally, I was like, wow, why have I not seen more of this in terms of articles? So I'm curious what prompted you to write on that topic. Yeah.
So the whole idea of bodily sensations, and we talk about them over here as being experienced, as in the UK, as being experienced as urges and kind of impulses. And actually, I really loved what you said about it being bodily sensations, because that suddenly stopped it being terrifying. But for years before, I was in this world of thinking urges. Oh my goodness, doesn't that mean I want to do it? Right. So I really wanted to talk about them because it was the thing that made me so poorly. And it was when I had my son, I could just about handle the intrusive thoughts, the violent ones. Therapy kind of helped me to get a grasp on the fact that I wasn't my thoughts. But there was something about these body sensations that I thought were urges, were intent. I thought they indicated intent. I thought it meant that I wanted to do these things, right. And that was what was so terrifying about it. And as we've gone through advocacy, I've seen that gradually people have got a little bit kind of more open about the types of intrusive thoughts they have. As we went through all the years of talking about perinatal OCD, gradually people started to talk a little bit more. They were talking about harm OCD. They were gradually starting to talk about your kind of sexual thoughts about. So it was gradually, every time someone did something, someone else built on it. Yet we never ever talked about this kind of bodily sensation to harm. No one ever seemed to talk about that. And it was just this gaping hole in in knowledge, because people were talking about it so openly. They're like, I so love how OCD is like changing, the conversation is changing. And yet I always noticed that when we got to that, no one talked about it.
Yeah.
Again, like the Royal College of Psychiatrists do actually use the word urge in their leaflet about perinatal OCD, and occasionally you'll see one of the charities mention the word urge, but there's never a discussion around it. So you're left as someone with OCD thinking, what on earth does this mean?
It's a genuine urge versus it's that fear I could have this urge. Yeah.
Right. Or the interpretation of the physical sensations of this must be an urge because I'm having these thoughts. And it's hard too, because in addition to what you're saying about in the UK, the DSM defines obsessions as thoughts, images, and urges, which I actually disagree with. Because I think honestly that we don't talk about this enough, but there are two parts. There's the trigger, which can be an internal image, a physical sensation, a thought. And then there's the interpretation of that as something that could be a threat, which is where the obsession comes into play. Like, oh my gosh, well, what does this mean about me? Maybe this means I actually do want to harm my baby, or maybe this means that I am attracted to fill in the blank, right? Like there are all of these different ways in which that can then impact people. But at that initial thing, it's not only is it not an obsession, in my opinion, it's a trigger, but then it's this idea that urge, I don't know, it's like the precision of language is really not there, which is not helpful.
It's not. The semantics is off. It doesn't matter.
And explain it, no one can explain it. So I do remember using the word urge when I spoke to therapists, and the guts that took to say to a therapist,
it's terrifying.
It's like, I was only because I was really I'd had enough. I was at the end of my terror that I actually said it. But the description around it and the discussion around it just isn't there. And I think it's because people aren't, well, one, they're not sure. The subject knowledge just isn't there, because a lot of us in the UK as well, we're looking at NHS therapists. So we're not looking at specialists. So for a start, the knowledge isn't there, but then also people are worried about the discussion around it. And it tends to, occasionally sometimes people, there are incorrect referrals made and stuff like that. And that's terrifying for people, So it's just about, I wanted someone to be able to talk about it and just say it how it was. And I thought, I've been working in this field for 6 years now. There's not a person on the planet who can't Google me and find out my deepest, darkest thoughts. I might as well be the one to do it, because I'm already in that position.
You did it beautifully, though.
You did.
Thank you very much. I've got to say though, Kelley, there's no way I would have written that without your help. There's no way. I had to have someone that I trusted completely looking at that, and someone who, as a professional, I could trust, because there was absolutely no way I was going to run the risk of getting that wrong for people. So, and your time was amazing. Thank you. I mean, Kelley sent me this email like this. She's working. She's working.
So there's my anxiety showing up. I think I had even called Lauren and I said, oh man, Catherine might think I've gone round the bend, because I sent her an email that was, I think, 5 paragraphs, and I tend to over-explain. So I'm
well, and I think that all three of us are just so damn passionate about this topic, not only because, we're in the community of advocacy and of course with our work, but because we all have lived experience with this and how isolating and lonely it can be to have these things happening and have nobody who understands or acknowledges or
I was going to say, I do think there is I feel that the urge and the feeling of having an emotion that's in line with, like, anger, for example, right? Like, if I feel angry at my daughter because she is frustrating me, okay, I've said do all the things in the effective way a parent should do, and she's still throwing a tantrum. And then I get an intrusive thought like, oh, you could just on the wall, right? That's just as scary to me, right? Like, it mirrors and parallels that urge feeling, because it feels like, oh, I'm that much closer. I'm a little closer to doing that thing. OCD is just, it's difficult. It's difficult.
And I'm so
sorry. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No. Go, Catherine, go.
I've done so much work around self-compassion and things like that. And that's where, in terms of an urge like that, when I'm angry at my little one, because I could explode sometimes, it's so frustrating, particularly if you've got work deadlines and stuff. But I found that compassion, which I had to teach myself, by the way, I had none 6 years ago. None, nada. But it really helped with that kind of thing, and it kind of makes me realise that actually I'm allowed to be frustrated and angry, because this is a frustrating and anger-inducing moment I'm going through right now. And that's
absolutely
how therapies help in other places too. It's not just OCD. It's like when you're about to lose it as a mother as well.
Yeah, they validate you. That, my OCD therapist was like, "Get mad more. Like, what are you talking about? She sounds like she's being a nightmare."
Well, that's the thing, is there's not enough discussion. It kind of reminds me of our OCD in that way, is that there's not enough discussion about what it's like to actually be a human, whether that's a human relationship to a child or a relationship to a significant other, right? Like there's this fairy tale of, well, you give birth, and then you look at this thing and you're immediately connected. We've talked about it on here before. And it's like, after you've just undergone this huge trauma, right?
Yeah. You might not feel immediately connected. Yeah.
And then there's this expectation that you should just always be, and the continuity of love does not necessitate, wow, words, constantly liking somebody or their behaviors. And having that nuance in terms of how we look at our relationships to other people is really important. Otherwise, then you have a thought like, oh, I just want to murder this person. And it's like, whoa, wait, what does that mean? Right? What does it mean that I just had that thought? When it's like, well, of course you had that thought because people are frustrating as hell.
So someone had mentioned, could we explain a little bit more what the urge OCD is? And I would just say we can talk about it, but also check out Catherine's website, because you can read the full article on there, which is tamingolivia.com. But Catherine, do you want to take the lead on this?
I'm very happy to let you do that one. I'd really love it if you could answer that. I think you'd do much better.
Okay, and then Lauren can help. So the way that we were talking about it is, if you've ever stood at the edge of a train and going, oh, I could just push somebody, or I could just jump right into the tracks. Or if you're driving your car and you get this urge of like, oh, I could just swerve my car and go across all the lanes and slam into the center divider. That's how we would define exactly what we had written this article about, or that Catherine had written the article about. And the way that we have defined it is that this is not what we would actually define as an urge, because an urge is something that we are aligned with. It like, oh yes, I have this urge to want to eat this ice cream and it feels good and yum, yum, yum. Right. But in OCD, it's this feeling, this physical reaction, or this trigger of uncomfortable distress and intrusive thoughts, and then going, oh, what if I did do that, right? Because it's not a true urge if it's not aligned in that way. But Lauren, do you want to?
No, I mean, I think you crushed it.
Okay, cool. So I hope we explained it.
I do want to add just another idea to the discussion though, because I think what happens is when we call it an urge, which is why it's so important what you both are talking about, that comes with all of the associations that we have with an urge. So if you say, oh, I'm having this urge, that's different from saying I'm having this physical sensation that I'm interpreting as an urge. And that's likely to make you more anxious because you're associating all of what Kelley was just saying with what you're experiencing. That, oh, well, that means that it's something that I want, and et cetera. Not that you're actually thinking all of these things, but this is the amazingness of the human mind, that we connect all these things, and it, to your point, validates.
Yeah, it gives it this validity, like, oh yeah, urge, that means you really want to.
Right. So, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, what else can you?
Yeah, sorry, I saw there was a comment about from Sean Chinook of Draw Your Monster, which, by the way, plugging him, because it sounds like there's so much actually involved with your work with Taming Olivia and bringing creativity and what he does for the OCD community. But he said, what if the urge isn't necessarily associated with a validating emotion, sometimes goes along with it, like slam urge out of nowhere? Oh, yeah. Like it doesn't have to be because you're angry. It could just be
no.
Yeah.
It could be, I'm just driving along, having a ride back home from work. I don't drive home from work anymore, but because I work from home. But
the
point, yes. Just go
home, aren't we?
Yeah. Help me. And then you just take the wheel and like, oh, I could just kill like 60 people with just a little rent. So yeah. Oftentimes that is what it happens, which makes it so terrifying.
Right. And
you're missing pinpointing what that is, because that's what it used to be when I was little. I had this sudden, I wasn't aware of any thought that was in it. It was just this sudden kind of like urge.
Feeling, yeah.
And yeah, the feeling, the bodily sensation is like the pump of adrenaline. I could immediately feel like the stress hit. And so then that's the interpretation, isn't it? I'm assuming that those bodily sensations are representing me actually wanting to do it, because there's that doubt, that uncertainty because of OCD. That's how I always see it happening to me.
100%.
Yeah. And you start to become very aware of the like tingling sensation in your hands, right? Or if there's any sort of pressure that happens in your hands that you're like, oh my gosh, does that indicate that I'm about to do it? And then of course.
Yes. Or like you got to stand up. It always affects my vision. I think it's anxiety, isn't it? It's just the biological side of anxiety. My vision blurs. And then I start thinking to myself, well, if I'm losing control of my vision, what else am I? You know, and it just like, it looks for any little bit of evidence it can find and uses that. You know, you have to really be clued in to be able to, in that state, kind of go.
So true.
Fine.
I'm curious, Catherine, I know you've done so much work with Olivia, who I adore, and my daughter loves Olivia too. She wants to look at all the pictures of Olivia, even the scary ones. I'm like, okay. But anyways, I know a lot of it is self-compassion. There she is. Yeah. And in those moments of just terror, I'm wondering, how do you approach it in that moment, or is it more later, right? Because it's so easy to jump to anger and frustration and like, oh, OCD sucks so much. And it does. And at the same time, we can't fight against this thing that's part of us. It's part of our brain. It's counterintuitive, actually. And it gets us more stuck in the anger.
I think the way that I've dealt with it has evolved over the years. So, I mean, it took a couple of years of recovery for anger to even creep into it. It was sheer terror. You know, it was stuck to the sofa terror. My husband was in between me and my son, because that's what it was always directed at. You know, in came all the compulsions and avoidance and stuff like that. It was sheer terror where I couldn't move. And then over the years, obviously, as I started to get better, the frustration and everything else would start to creep in a little bit, and the anger would creep in. And now I'm actually at the point, so you start off small and you expand. It's baby steps all the time that I use for my recovery. So I would force myself to sit there for 3 minutes, then 4 minutes, then 5 minutes before I addressed whatever I was doing, whether it was just getting up and going somewhere else, whether it was trying to put something on TV just to distract myself just for 5 minutes. And I know that can be a compulsion sometimes, but that distraction sometimes was the only thing that would out and allow me to just then go back to what I was doing, you know. So it's making the choice that's right for you in that moment,
and that's okay, by the way. We let our clients do that too. Like, if it gets you to the next point B, then let's do it. Absolutely. And so I'm at the point now where I've done so many exposures, I can't get them to bother me at all. I mean, I keep working that muscle, you know. Every now and again I try and bring something on, or if I'm in a specific position, I'll be like, right, and I'll try and bring it on. And it doesn't bother me. And even new ones come in and they don't bother me either. So it's almost like I've done so much exposure now that I'm indifferent to it. I just think, oh, here we go again, shut up, you know. But it's not, it took a long time to get there. And it was self-compassion. The whole thing with Olivia was about separating myself from the condition in the first place. It was that kind of little cartoon character that just helped me to draw on those kind of feelings of wanting to help the vulnerable and you know, and then apply that to me. So it was just using as many strategies as I could, but it took a long time. I mean, I was really, really, really ill about 7, 8 years ago. And it's only been the past couple of years that I'm actually at the point where I'm just kind of like, you know. But it was steady increases the whole way through, steady increases. Yeah.
I'm curious as to how you, or if there were any techniques or tools that you found useful when it came to recognizing what was happening in the moment, right? Like, because to your point earlier, that experience of the quote unquote urge is it's so overwhelming, and it's so easy to get hooked in that. So taking a step back can be difficult. I'm just sort of curious in your journey if there was anything particularly helpful.
Psychoeducation was massive, and it was making sure that I understood things that I would then kind of tell myself and educate myself about in the moment, and they had to be short little snippets, and they had to be easily accessible. So it was things like books that I'd read, the odd little sentence, or it was I'd written myself compassionate letters, and I'd actually read them so many times I pretty much recite them word for word, but they all were for different reasons. And I had one that was about the bodily sensations, and so I remember there was one time we went to go and see HMS Belfast, which is a big warship on the Thames, and I was standing very close to my son near the edge. Just this massive drop down to the
and the head explosion.
I've done that since, not bothered at all, did it on purpose, but that time was absolutely horrendous. But I do remember I knew what was happening, and so I knew what I wanted to do was to run away and to be away from him. I knew that I wanted my husband to be in between us, and so I didn't let myself do it, because I knew immediately, because I'd read so much about it, I just knew that it would make it worse if I gave in. So I forced myself to stay there. I'd learned about my breathing by that point, and how to make sure that I was properly breathing. Mindfulness, knowledge of the biology of the body. So I understood that the reason I felt like I was going to be sick was anxiety, not because I really was going to chuck my son over,
Right.
Tiny little snippets of education
that
I call on. And whereas before the terror had been so bad I couldn't get any of it in, gradually little bits crept in again, and that I think is the importance of keeping on trying with little bits, even if I just managed it for 1 minute and then had to run. It's still been an achievement that time, so that's what I did, mainly like kind of positive self-talk and educating myself, reminding myself
like you got this.
Yeah, some badassery right there.
Badassery.
I guess I'm curious too, because we talk so much in this community and on this podcast about the idea of accepting uncertainty. And I think that it can be really challenging in the process of recovery to at a certain point sit, because a lot of people will have that thought of like, oh, well, this isn't actually true, right? Like I don't actually want to do this thing, so I'm safe. But of course, OCD knows no bounds and likes to come up with, right? Like we have doubting minds. And so what happens then when your brain goes, yeah, but what if it is a genuine urge? Which I can't tell you how often I hear that in my office. And
it feels so real, right? It feels so real.
Right.
I'm just sort of makes it sound like you agree with it or almost like it, and I think you have to be a certain level in your recovery to be able to accept it. Because if someone came to me when I was really, really, really poorly and said, you just need to work on accepting this, I would just be like, what are you talking about?
I know. Well, then you'd never come back. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't. I'd be like, no, goodbye.
What is wrong with you? Why are you suggesting I accept this? First thing in the world, isn't it? But so it's like kind of educating people what that acceptance actually means, and then knowing that you've really got a bit of a safety net in place before you suggest it, because I do think that people are told to use acceptance very early on when they're still very poorly, and I think that's just utterly terrifying. It's just really scary.
Yeah, I agree. I usually try to slowly dip their toes into the idea of it. Yeah.
Well, and I think that that's where things like cognitive restructuring can be really helpful to say like, okay, well, what's likely here, right? Before we take the plunge and we just accept that these thoughts are here and really accept ultimately we can't know for sure what they mean, that let's look at what's most probable.
Right.
And we're going to assume that that's right while accepting that we don't. Kelley and I were just having a conversation about this last night, right? Like the idea of not, when you don't know something, not assuming the worst, right? Like there's this weird like middle ground where it's like you assume that everything's going to work out, but you accept that you can't know for sure.
Yeah. Right. Because we often get into this place when we're doing exposures, even of just like, oh, right. Okay. Right. Okay. Negative, right? We go to negative default. The bad thing's going to happen. And then we lose sight of the fact that we can hold optimism and still move forward in exposures.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah. Cool.
We did have some questions that came in at the beginning if we want to take a look. And there may have been some more throughout. If you have any questions, feel free to add them to the queue in the lower right-hand corner. There's a question mark symbol.
And Catherine, we didn't go over how much time you have. So let us know. We usually go 45 or so. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, my husband is on bedtime duties tonight for our little boy, so you've got me as long as you want me.
Okay. Maybe a couple more minutes to answer the.
Okay.
Issue with somebody was calling me.
How
so
dare
here we go.
Rude.
How dare they not know that I'm unalive?
Yes.
Let's see. So I thought that this was an interesting one. The question for those listening is, having urges makes me feel out of control. How to sit with the fear that you might act on it.
Yeah. So this is going back to what Catherine was saying, is when was early on, is knowing this is anxiety. This is what anxiety feels like. But then the piece we didn't say is her willingness to say, I'm going to sit through this feeling and hold my son and be here without doing the compulsion. It's very hard. And to have tons and tons of self-compassion if it doesn't go that way. But I think that's the key, is the willingness to just do nothing.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, before I even started doing exposures, I had such doubt in who I was as a person. I really thought I was a monster. And so sitting with that wasn't an option for me then. We stopped all ERP just so that I could work on doing some stuff about me and try and build up my self-esteem, because it was once I actually started to believe that I was kind of worth that recovery and not this hideous, dangerous monster, that's when I could start at ERP, and start sitting with that and stuff. So it was like there were skills behind it as well that I feel that we kind of need to learn first, because if your self-esteem's at rock bottom, it's going to be hard for you to kind of sit there with those things sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's where the self-compassion comes in, right? Is like, that's okay, it's hard, right? Like, this is hard, this is scary. That's okay if you didn't do it, right? Like, that's okay. So absolutely. And I think when I look at OCD recovery as like I zoom out and I look at it as the header of learning to trust ourselves again, right? Is because it's so much doubting. And I don't want to go down too much, but yeah, well said.
No, but it's back to the question, to tie what you just said about trusting yourself, right? How do you sit with the fear that you might act? You make the choice behaviorally to trust yourself, even in the absence of whatever we might experience as the feeling of trust. And I think that's, I don't know, certainly what I see a lot, what I have experienced myself, is just taking the leap, seeing how it goes.
Yeah. You can handle the feeling.
Yeah, totally.
I wish I'd known about you ladies 6 years ago.
Me too. Hey, me too. I don't know how I got it this far.
No, man. I definitely wasn't here 6 years ago. What I'm trying to think, what year am I at? Oh yeah.
Yep.
It is a journey. I love what you said, Catherine, about taking it one step at a time. And for anyone who's listening, I think that it can feel very daunting and perhaps unattainable if you're hearing us talk about these things with sort of, oh, well, it's just that thought, which it has not been the case always for any of us here.
Yeah.
And sometimes still, I'm going to go ahead and say for myself, sometimes still isn't. I have thoughts come in where I'm convinced, right? Like this, and I have the wherewithal now to be aware of my conviction being inherently suspect, but that doesn't mean that I'm not still sometimes pulled in by the undertow, as Kelley said the other day, of feelings. It's hard. It is hard.
Yeah.
Should we take another question?
Sure.
All right. Somebody asked, and I'll just say this while I'm scrolling the others, can urges be very intense?
Oh, yes. Oh, they will knock you on your ass. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But that doesn't mean that it's more true, right? Or that you're more likely to. It's just very uncomfortable experience.
Mm. And I'm going to pull this up as sort of an adjunct to that. I think I want to just really quickly do a side note on feeling real, because I think it's an important thing in the way that you guys are talking about urges.
No, I'm glad you're going to talk about it. Yes. I meant to, and I didn't.
Well, I know you and I feel similarly passionate about this topic, and it's something that I'm actually pretty, firm with my clients about, like, whoa, wait a second. What are we talking about? Feeling real? What that's not a feeling. I don't know what that face on the feeling wheel chart is, right?
Feelings are sad and angry and fear, not real.
Not real. No, that's not a feeling. It's a narrative, right? It's thoughts. So this, again, that I'm having an emotional experience, that the interpretation of that is, this must mean it's real because of the intensity. And if we then go and say, oh, it feels real, that does the same validation that Kelley was talking about earlier with the urges. It essentially says, oh, well, then it's likely to be real. And that's just not the case.
It's just totally incorrect.
It's not.
It is a cognitive distortion on top of all of it.
It's called emotional reasoning.
Yeah.
And feelings aren't facts, right? Like I can speak to this on so many occasions personally where like I said earlier, I've been convinced that something's true, and then later it's like, oh no, that was just all in my head. That's cool. Okay. You're a great storyteller.
So glad I spent all that time worried about it. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. But I think the question that I pulled up here is, why do we get urges? And I'm assuming that that's in the context of OCD. I have thoughts, but I'd be so curious to hear what you guys think.
I always think is it not just us being a bit random? Is it not just like, I just think, like, as a human being, I mean, I am not a professional at all, but the way I kind of think to myself about it is like, it makes sense in the evolutionary sense for us to be slightly, aware of different things. And that's just one of the things that happens. I think that about thoughts. I think that about feelings. I think it's just a bit random. That's how I think, but I'm probably completely wrong. But it seems to help me thinking that.
No, I think that you're right. I think that we think as humans that all of our internal experiences have some sort of meaning ascribed to them, as opposed to, like, we don't think that about dogs, like we don't, if a dog starts barking at the mailman, like, while looking out the window, we don't think, well, stupid dog, it's just the mailman. We're like, oh, of course the dog's barking at the mailman again. Right. Like, why is it that everything in us, and even in kids, right? You can see in kids where they're constantly at the whim of their emotions. And for some reason we think that we as adults are
better,
exempt from this. Like, somehow
we just hold it in and feel resentment and simmer.
A simmer.
Yeah.
Or hopefully we accept our feelings and set boundaries occasionally if you know, we're working toward being healthy. But
some of us
sometimes. But I think that in addition, yes, random. And then I think what happens is, if we're like breaking down the idea of the urge as we've been talking about it, that physical experiences are random and they come up, and then our brains, we want to figure everything out. And to your point, Catherine, of course we do. That's very evolutionarily beneficial. Like, try to figure things out. That keeps you safe, unless it then goes totally haywire and then you end up with OCD or an anxiety disorder. And I think from that perspective, why urges? Well, I think what we're calling urges are experiences, they're experienced that way because the thing is important to us.
Yeah.
We call them urges because that's the fear, right? Like, of course, we started this conversation with the discussion of postpartum OCD, and can you think of anything scarier to a new parent than, oh my gosh, but what if
No, I can't.
Right? No.
I've tried.
Yeah. Right. So that's why you're going to experience that as an urge, because that's the scariest thing and the thing that you want to protect yourself from.
Right. Which I think is where Olivia plays a great role in describing OCD, right? Is like, she's part of our brain, all the other little Olivias running around.
It's just not pretend to, isn't it? You can show yourself compassion and kindness, and it helps you separate and personify it, but then you don't have to attend to everything. Not everything. I mean, I sometimes feel like I don't have a choice. My brain starts attending something that I don't particularly need it to attend to, but then I kind of actively make the decision to try and at least, or let it attend to something in the background whilst I'm actually focusing on, I suppose, my values or my work or something like that. You know, it's actually choosing not to sit there and try and nitpick at this thing annoying me, because that will never stop. That will just keep going on, because OCD, once I solve one thing, we'll keep sticking something else in, you know. So it's choosing not to pretend, and that's not always easy, but it is a skill that can be learned, you know, just like everything else.
Baby steps.
Baby steps.
And that's what I trust.
Baby steps of trust. And that's why I love what you said earlier about the TV thing. I think sometimes we think of that as distraction, and I'm sure it can be, like, but I think that the desire to push away certain experiences is where we get into trouble. The desire to refocus our attention on something that matters more to us. And frankly, television does matter more to me than trying to figure out with certainty whether or not all my thoughts mean something. Then I'm going to refocus my attention on that instead of continuing to leave my attention on this thing.
No, right, because your thoughts are still there and you're still terrified, but it's just enough to take the edge off, like taking a shot of alcohol, which I don't endorse. I'm just saying it takes a little edge off.
Well, but what we're talking about is response prevention. So it's like I don't know, for me, sometimes the edge is really still there, but it's like, I'm not going to keep feeding the beast. I'm not going to keep myself stuck.
You're choosing not to kind of, because I tend to try and keep what is a compulsion and what's actually quite a good recovery strategy. You know, sometimes in a Venn diagram, I'm sure there'd be a lot of crossover. You know, it's kind of, am I now watching telly for too long so that I'm distracted? You know, there's kind of, you can question yourself about what you're doing. You know, if I was to suddenly decide to spend the next week watching telly, that's an issue. Or even the next little things so that I can then carry on doing what I'm doing, even if I do still feel like rubbish. That's a helpful choice that I've just made. That was a good self-care choice for me, you know, that television watching then. So it's,
absolutely.
Just being careful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said.
Totally.
Okay. We should probably wrap up, because I think Instagram will kick us off at a certain point.
Give us issues at the hour at least. Yeah. So it was really so lovely to have you. Thank you for taking the time and for speaking so openly about your experience and for all that you do for this community. Yeah.
Yes. I can't wait to meet you in real life.
I know. During COVID, I was heading over for the IOCDF conference as well. Was it the New York one? And then we couldn't come because of COVID. I was like, no. But one day I promise I'll come over. But I thank you so much for having me on. It's just been wonderful, and I've learned such a lot. I'm going to rewatch this and put some notes and things that you two ladies have talked about, because it's so helpful. And Kelley, thank you for your help with the blog, because that was not an easy one to write, was it? We had to do some thinking about it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you,
and
for
go check that
brave.
out.
Yeah, and showing up.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we will talk to you soon. Are you going to Denver conference or have you not?
Yeah.
I have absolutely no idea yet. I don't know. When is it? Is it July?
July.
If I can scrape some cash together, I'll definitely go there.
Well, either way, I'm going to be over in the UK soon because my father's British. So I'm going to like come descend upon you, I think.
Which means I'm going to ride on her coattails.
That's right. We're going to aggressively descend upon you. You're in London, did you say?
London, but I can travel to wherever you are. I would love to see you both in real life. That would be awesome. And if I can get over.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
All right, gang. Well, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Bye.
Bye.